Okay, this topic is going to look at exploring language choices. So it's going to look at exploring language choices. What we're going to do first is we're going to explain and comment on the writer's use of rhetorical devices. So we're going to explain, we're going to go into comment on the writer's use of rhetorical devices. Then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the grammar and punctuation. We're going to explain and comment on the writer's use of grammar, writer's use of grammar, and the writer's use of punctuation, writer's use of punctuation, writer's use of punctuation. So two things, rhetorical devices we're going to look at, and we're going to look at grammar and punctuation. Rhetorical devices. Rhetorical devices are techniques that speakers and writers use to influence their readers and listeners. So if you have a speaker, if they are wanting to influence you, the writer or the speaker may use rhetorical questions to influence you. They are used very often in texts, so many times they are used, which are written to persuade or argue. So they're usually written to persuade or argue. Now, rhetorical questions are questions which do not demand an answer. So they don't require an answer. They don't require you to give a yes or a no. A writer might use them to make you think. So the key point is it makes you think, providing your own answer in your head. So in your own mind, you make up your own answer. So you're not looking at a question. You're looking at the question, but you're not answering it. Now let's look at some examples of rhetorical questions. Why is it that so many small shops are closing? Now, this question is relatively important. You might have many answers in your mind to explain that, but the writer usually knows the answer. They expect a rhetorical question. The answer is obvious, but it's the fault of the supermarkets. And we all know that the supermarkets are taking the trade of the small shopkeeper. But sometimes, especially at the end of a text, they might not offer an answer. So they might not give you an answer. And the question is therefore to make you think about the issue and come to your own conclusion. So you're coming to your own conclusion. Now, we've looked at a lot of evidence. And we've heard a lot of opinions, but the question remains, why are so many small shops closing? So the rhetorical question is, why are there so many shops closing? So another rhetorical device is list or rule of three or list of three. And often the list of three are used to emphasize a point. So it's used to emphasize a point. So it's used to emphasize a point and to show there are several aspects to something or build up a climax. So there are several elements, several aspects, several parts to something to build up a climax. Now, these issues affects the most vulnerable in our society, children, the elderly, and the disabled. This is one example. An example is of a list of three is we've given three things here. We've given that these issues are affecting children, elderly, and the disabled. This list is used to explain what the writer means by the most vulnerable. So the word most vulnerable is further explained by providing three examples. And these three examples are children, elderly, and the very disabled. And by giving this, it's explaining this word vulnerable. So it shows how many people are affected. The decision is unthinking, uncaring, and downright cruel. This is another example. And the writer builds up the word cruel by playing on the reader's emotions. So rather than just saying this decision is cruel, the writer says unthinkable, you can't think of it, it's uncaring, it's insensitive, and it's downright cruel. So rather than just saying this decision is cruel, they use these additional words, and it's a list of 3, and this is an example of a rhetorical device where there's a list of 3 points. Now, we're looking at now a repetition, and repetition, what it does is it emphasizes the most important points. So what does repetition do? It emphasizes the most important points throughout a text. So if a writer may come back to the same point, there might be slight variations in the phrase, so they might change the phrase a little, but they will repeat those words. For example, a writer might repeat the phrase, and still nobody knew the answer, at the end of each paragraph, but the end, the final paragraph with, and now everybody knew the answer. So, a writer might repeat the phrase, and still nobody knew the answer, and at the end of the paragraph, but the end, the final paragraph might say, and now everyone knew the answer. So there is a slight variation, there is a slight change in the way the words are used. Whilst at first it would say nobody knew the answer, now the answer is repeated with nobody knew the answer, and it's repeated with everybody knew the answer, but it's repeated, and what it does is it uses emphasis, it emphasizes, and this is an example of repetition. With hyperbole, it emphasizes opinions or feelings. So it emphasizes opinions and feelings, and either they're positive or they're negative. They're either positive or they're negative. And hyperboles are exaggeration, and again, they emphasize. It's a device that speakers or writers will use to influence the reader or the listener by emphasizing, exaggerating. That building is surely the ugliest and most monstrous ever inflicted on the people of Puddington. This example exaggerates in order to make the point across. To put the point across, the writer uses exaggeration. Writers use language to play on the reader's emotions. They use language to play on the reader's emotion, and this is emotive language. It is emotive language. It plays on the reader's emotions, and emotive language can appeal to all sorts of emotions. So it can appeal to all sorts of emotions. Emotive language can appeal to all sorts of emotions. There can be sympathy, there can be pity, there can be anger, and they're often used in newspaper writing. For example, council closes children's playground. Cruel council closes heartbroken kids' playground. Now, the first version is we can make up our own minds, but the few extra words in the second one influence our emotions. It influences our emotions. Now, when we're looking at grammar and punctuation, when we're exploring language choices, most texts use the grammar of standard English. So they use standard English. So when writers use non-standard grammar, so when the writer uses non-standard grammar, just as when they use slang, or dialect words, it is for a purpose. So there's a reason why they use non-standard grammar. Now, non-standard grammar or non-standard English is most likely to be used in speech. So it's used in speech. So it's when we're speaking. Someone might say, she don't like them shoes no more, rather than standard English, she doesn't like those shoes anymore. The first was non-standard English, the first was non-standard English, the first was non-standard English, where it read, she don't like them shoes no more, whilst the second was the standard English, the second was standard English, she doesn't like those shoes anymore. Non-standard grammar is rarely used for a whole text. So non-standard grammar is hardly used for the whole text. So non-standard English is hardly used. So in a story, it might reflect the character and the background of the narrator. So using non-standard grammar will show you what the character is like by using non-standard English. So again, it's referring back to the social class, whether somebody is rich, somebody is poor, which region somebody is from. And in a leaflet or an advert, it might be trying to sound chatty and informal. So it might want to engage the reader or draw the reader in by sounding chatty, by sounding informal. Text can be written in the first person, so we can read it in the first person. So first persons are when it's I or we, or it might be written in the second person. So it might be written in the second person, such as you. So the third, or it might be even written in the third person. So it might be written in the third person. And the third person examples are he, she, or they. He, she, and they. So the first person was I or we. The first person was I or we. The second person is you. The second person is you. And the third person is he, she, or they, where I and we includes us, or talking about yourself, and the you is a second person, and the third person is he, she, or they. So we're referring to grammar and punctuation. We're referring to grammar and punctuation. The tense in a text is written in, can make the difference in the way the tone is and the effect it has on the reader. So the tense of the text and how it's written can make that difference in the tone and affect the readers. If you look at past tense, if you read a text which has past tense, it's used for things that have happened. And it's usually the case in stories that past tense is used. But the present tense can make the story or description more vivid. It can make it more clear, more imaginative, and that's the effect of the present tense. So while stories are written in the past tense, using present tense gives it more vividness. Longer and complex sentences are used to convey complicated information. So it passes on complicated information to describe things in detail. So it describes things in detail. So when you have longer sentences, when you have complex sentences, it passes on information in more detail. Short sentences emphasize an important point by stating it simply. So it's more punchy, it's more clearer. Although there's less detail, it gets the point across more lucidly, more clearly. Now, exclamation marks indicate shock. Exclamation marks indicate shock. And they surprise or excite the reader. And they can follow imperatives like commands. Imperatives are commands. And these address the readers directly. So exclamation marks, because they shock, they surprise, they follow commands and can address the reader directly. So it engages the reader, it influences the reader, it draws the reader in by having excitement, shock, and surprise. Whilst question marks, unless they are used in speech, they indicate the writer using rhetorical questions. So they indicate the writers are using rhetorical questions. So unless they're used in speech, they are indicating the use of rhetorical questions. Whilst ellipsis can show that the words have been missed out. So those words have been missed out, or speech trailing off. So I just wonder, I was just wondering whether ... oh, never mind, or leaves the reader wondering what is going to happen next. So it misses some words out, and it leaves the reader wondering. So I'm gonna conclude these key points. We've been learning about exploring language choices. We've been explaining and commenting on rhetorical devices, and rhetorical devices are there's a number of rhetorical devices. There's rhetorical questions. There's the list of three, or the rule of three, and there's also repetition and hyperbole. Now, rhetorical devices are used by speakers. They're used by writers to influence the readers. They are often in texts which are written to persuade or argue. Now, the key point is to play on the emotions. It's to play on the emotions. So when you're exaggerating, you're playing on the emotion. So that's what the writer is doing, is playing on the emotion. Now, another key point is to use grammar. When writers use grammar and punctuation, they contribute to the effect on the text. They contribute to the effect on the text on the reader. So the readers are influenced by the way they use the grammar and punctuation. So when we were referring to the tenses, when we were referring to the imperatives, the exclamation marks, the ellipses, the standard English, the non-standard English, it all influences the reader, and it gives you an idea of it has a certain effect. So English language, we're measuring the effect, and what effect it's having. The first person makes the text more personal. So you can associate it. When you read words like I or we, it becomes more personal, whilst the second person addresses the readers directly. So by saying you, it addresses the reader directly. It engages the reader. The first one made it more personal. The second one engages the reader. And the third person is detached. It's more neutral. And it's taking a step away from the first and the second person. A series of short sentences are used to give a sense of excitement or anxiety or worry, whereas longer sentences give more information or more excitement. So the key words in this topic are rhetorical questions, list or the rule of three, repetition, hyperbole, emotive, standard English, tense, imperative, ellipsis. So we've been learning about exploring language choices. We've looked at rhetorical devices. We've looked at grammar and punctuation, and we've discussed this in relative detail.